In this video, we are going to talk about shape building, and I did a little bit already just so that you wouldn't have to watch me weave forever. So you can see I've drawn this curved shape over the warp, and I've started building up yarn into that shape. So I'm just going to continue with that. So one of the tricks of shape building is you kind of have to have some idea of what you're going to do over the top of a shape before you get too far along in weaving it. And in this case, I know that I want to do an outline over the top of this shape. So I'm still doing my bubbling. I don't have to make the bubbles quite as big because I'm not going all the way across the warp here, but I'm just weaving. Basically, it's like, filling in between the dotted lines. I'm just weaving between the dotted lines. The other trick to shape building, so I said you have to kind of have an idea of where you're going before you begin. And so I know that what I want to do is outline this after I'm done. And if I want to outline it, one of the little tricks is that you can't jump up over more than 2 turns. And by turns, I mean this little part on this warp where I've turned around and gone the other direction, that's a turn. So you can't go over more than 2 turns with an outline. It becomes too thick. It's too much of a horizontal, or a vertical jump. And so the yarn ends up getting loose and kind of funky. So I'm making sure that as I build up this shape, I am not doing any more than 2 turns at the same place. So you can see I've got 2 turns on that thread. I've got 2 turns on this thread over here. Each one is only 2 turns. So I'm coming back around. Oops, I think I could do one more turn on that one. I'm coming back around. I'm not just paying attention to the outline, but I'm also paying attention to this curve and making sure that I don't go up farther than my yarn can handle when I do the outline. So another little thing about this, and you'll see what I mean about the jumps in just a minute when I put the outline on it. The other little thing about shape building is there is no such thing as a curve in weaving. This is a grid. This is, warp goes this way, weft goes this way. It's a grid. So there's no true curves. What I'm weaving is actually a triangle. And right now it kind of looks like a triangle. The outline over the top of it is going to make it look like a curve. And the other thing that can make it look a little bit more like a curve is if you don't use exactly the same change every time. So going up, I had mentioned that I'm not going over, or I'm not turning more than twice over the same warp thread. So now at the very top here, I've gone down to once over every warp thread instead of twice. And that's flattening out the top of it and making it look a little bit more like a curve. So on a shape at the end, we're going to go all the way down the shape that we've made, if you can. You can also do that with your outline, which I think I'm going to do. So I'm going to start down, and I'm going to splice right up here. And that's going to help, this again is going to help my curve look like a curve. So I'm going to take this end, unply it, just like we've been doing on all of our splices. Go here, and then I'm going to pick up my bobbin I'm using the day outline to do this, and that's completely within the rules, if you want to call them that, of how we're doing Tempestry. You can absolutely use your outline yarn for outlines of shapes. You don't have to use it just for days. So we've got that in. We're going to change the shed. Beading in can be a little bit different when you're on a curve because you can't put your fork flat. So this is a good place to use the end of the bobbin, or just tap it in with your fingers. Either way is fine. Now on the next pick, we're going to go all the way around this shape. Now notice it's kind of hard, or it can be kind of hard to get bubbles. So make sure you still leave enough space in there, even if you can't get a real bubble, to make sure you don't draw in. It's a pretty thin yarn, so I'm gonna go up and over a couple of times to make sure that I get that outline where I want it to be. One of the things that will make an outline over a shape look a little bit more organic, if you will, is to pick a spot where you're going to make the line a little bit thicker so it's not all exactly one thickness. So I haven't, on this pass, I haven't gone all the way down. I've ended up on the side here. So I'm just going to go back and forth in this one spot a couple times to make the line intentionally a little tiny bit thicker on that spot. And that will give it a little bit more organic shape when I get done. So there is my really nice curve with an outline over the top of it. I can then continue in my same method that I've been doing things, splice another color in, or even splice the same color in. I'm working on March, so I've got a lot of this one color, so I think I'm going to use the same color over again. So I bring my color in. When I'm making changes, I'm going to fill in this section to the left next. When I'm making changes, I try not to make a long run up a really steep angle if I'm doing splices or color changes. So you notice I didn't go all the way up to the top here. I just stopped kind of down here, and then I'm going to fill in. You may have situations where you can't do that, and that's fine. But the yarn, you can see it here. You've got a longer length of yarn if it's going at a diagonal than you do if it's going straight across. And that makes that a little bit vulnerable to buckling up or sagging. So it's a little bit better for the structure of the piece if you don't get a super long run right where you've done a change. So what I'm doing now is I'm filling in this spot on the left-hand side over the top of this curve that I just did. And I'm doing that for a couple of reasons. One is that angle that I just mentioned, that you can see that if you go down to where I'm weaving right here, you can see that when it's going across, it's getting those nice, even, I've heard weavers talk about them as kernels, like little kernels of wheat or corn or something. But those nice little even passes that have what look like even stitches in them. That can make your tapestry look very neat and tidy, and it also keeps the structure very firm and stable. So I'm going to do that, just this filling in. And you notice that even on the Mirex where I've got the shedding device, sometimes if I'm working on a long area, I just pick the shed with my fingers because that's easier than the whole thing of picking it up with a needle and putting a stick in, or whatever method you're doing. So when I'm working quickly, I always pick up small stuff with my hands. So I'm filling this in, and I'm going to continue. Got my yarn a little tangled here. This is what happens when your butterflies aren't very even, and you end up having places where the yarn overlaps in a bad way. So keep your butterflies stacked up, but not on top of each other as you're going around your pinky and your thumb. So what I'm going to do here, and I'll try to do it before I run out of this green yarn, is I'm going to create a second shape on top of the first shape. And let's say I'm going to start curving it around and go right there. So I'm going to leave that side one out now and just try to go right in this spot where this little curve is. And shape building can be so much fun because you can do it just like this. You can weave one little shape and say, oh, I think what I want on top of that is this other little tiny thing. Here's one of those places right here where we're going to have that thing where I've got one turn. I can get one more turn on that, but if I put a third turn onto that, the outline yarn will not make the jump onto it. Oh, I think this is going to end up just perfect. Great. There's just enough yarn to make it. You can also make decisions to kind of adapt your shape. And this will come up with the Tempestry project all the time, since our one big agreement is that we are not going to throw away any yarn. You may run into situations like, oh shoot, I've got this shape that I've done, but I really need to use half a yard more yarn. And you find yourself adapting your shape to do that. And I'm going to have a little tiny bit of that going on here, that I've got a little bit more yarn. So I'm just working back and forth sort of across the peak of this little curve, if you will, until I'm out of yarn. Okay, so I'm basically out of yarn. I'm going to unply. And I'm going to do that same thing I did before of taking part of it across. And I'm going to take my outline thread and go part across. And I just want to point out, as I'm getting ready to descend down into this other curve, this is the part right here that I did thicker. And I didn't plan this, but just as luck would have it, this curve is going to move right down and join into that thicker part, which is kind of the way that things would join together in nature. So, sometimes just happy accidents happen like that. I'd love to be able to say I'm a great designer and that's always planned, but that's not what actually happens. So same thing here, even on a little tiny one, I'm gonna make one spot that is just thicker than the other spots, because the difference that makes in making your pieces have depth and look natural and look like art instead of geometry. Not that there's anything wrong with geometry, but it's really a huge thing. Those little, whoops, I unwove that instead of weaving it. Those little choices about something like a thicker line or putting something a little bit off center really make a huge difference in how a piece of weaving is perceived. Okay. And across there, and change the shed and move it back there. So that is building shapes. And kind of like we've been doing before, I'm going to end this by just snipping off the ends that I can. I don't want to snip off anything that doesn't have at least a little bit woven over the top of it. So, and to snip, I'm just pulling up pretty firmly, getting my scissors in flat and snipping right on the fabric. And then if I lift these guys up, you see a very nice couple of hillsides going on there. So that is shape building.